Thank you for joining us. I'm Deneen Powell, the Fuse Executive Fellow for the City of Milwaukee's Environmental Collaboration Office. Mandy?
Hi there, my name is Mandy McAllister. I'm the founder of Hummingbird and a member of the Education and Outreach Work Group.
And Eric?
I'm Eric Schambarger. I'm Director of Environmental Sustainability for the City of Milwaukee. I lead the Environmental Collaboration Office, or ECO, and I'm thrilled to be part of the Climate Task Force and here to answer your questions about the plan so far.
The Environmental Collaboration Office hosted a town hall meeting at the end of October to share our progress on the Climate and Equity Plan and to answer your questions. We weren't able to answer all of your questions then, and we wanted to make sure that your questions were answered, so we're spending time with Eric today. We organized your questions into two parts. We posted a part one last week where Eric answered your questions about funding and implementation, commercial buildings, housing, and energy. In this second part, Eric will answer your questions about green infrastructure, green jobs, transportation, and waste. First, let's address one question we missed in our last video when we talked about energy. What are the thoughts around ground-mounted solar arrays placed on vacant lots?
So we definitely want to increase the amount of solar we have in our community. In the past year, we've worked to put solar on city-owned landfills near the airport where there's a lot of land there. Part of the reason we chose a landfill is it had land available that couldn't be used for other purposes. It had secure fencing around it so that you couldn't have people messing with it, not only to protect the equipment, but for safety reasons. You don't want people messing around with electricity on the ground. And the third thing is it was in a wide open space, so there wasn't shadows from surrounding buildings. So I think there are opportunities to put new ground-mounted solar systems, but I think vacant lots, you got to be real careful because, again, we want to make sure that they're not in between buildings where the lighting might not be great. We want to preserve as much of the vacant lots we have for development, trees, and urban agriculture and other things. So it's not the best use, but I don't want to make a blanket statement. There can be situations where ground-mounted systems work. As an example, we have put solar canopies where you can park underneath solar panels and privately owned parking structures. So those are probably some better situations for doing solar, but I would be a little bit careful about putting it on scattered vacant lots.
Thanks, Eric. Now let's get to the questions about green infrastructure and the Protect and Restore Nature in the City proposal. Where will the funding come from to expand the Green Schools program from 5 to 10 schools a year?
Well, that's the real challenge. And in fact, I think people on the working group wanted to go from 5 to 20, but the financial challenges is real. So we want to be prudent while still having bold goals. So the current sources of funding are the sewerage district, the city, and then a combination of state and federal grants and philanthropic funding. So we don't have a dedicated source immediately identified, but we're hoping that with the infrastructure bill that we can apply for more federal funds. Most of the funds are not earmarked for schools per se. Many of the funds are earmarked for water quality improvements. And so we have to make the connection for pots of federal money for water quality improvements and make that connection that when we do this in schoolyards, it improves water quality as the water flows to the rivers. So that's a long way of saying that we do not have lockdown funding to do the doubling yet, but we are going to be we'll have to work very closely with our federal and philanthropic partners to expand the funding. And in fact, just last week, we were hosting a delegation from Seattle that came to Milwaukee to learn how we were doing green schoolyards. So this is getting national attention, but we made that point that we need national sources of funding as this becomes a movement that's growing beyond Milwaukee nationally.
Wow, that's awesome to hear. So when it comes to like greening schoolyards and other projects, is permeable pavement the first choice for paving permits?
So in 2019, we passed this green infrastructure plan for the city, and there's a link to that in the chat. And when we passed that plan, we changed the city's stormwater ordinances, which is chapter 120 of the municipal ordinances. And that says anytime a development comes in to do of a certain size comes in, they have to do a stormwater management plan. And the first ½ inch of rainwater needs to be captured through green infrastructure. That is includes more options than just permeable pavement. That can include things like green roofs, bioswales, rain gardens, and permeable pavement. I actually like my green infrastructure green. I like vegetated green infrastructure. So I would prefer to see bioswales and things like that before permeable pavement. And the reason is there's more co-benefits to doing vegetated green infrastructure. You reduce the urban heat island effect more than permeable pavement. You get oxygen producing plants and beautification benefits when we do other forms of green infrastructure. But yes, I agree that these natural solutions should be the first thing that we're looking at when looking at managing stormwater.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Next, we have questions about green jobs and the Green Jobs Accelerator proposal. Green jobs, underemployment, and unemployment have been a problem since time immemorial, and we have thrown millions of dollars at the issue, yet the problem still remains. What are we going to do that's different this time around?
Well, thanks for the question. It is a persistent problem, but it's one that we have to keep working at because we have a situation where we don't have enough workers. I think inflation is being driven by the fact that we don't have enough contractors and workers doing that. And so you have, contractors can ask for higher costs to do business. So we need to get more people into the workforce. And I think what we're looking at doing differently is, for one thing, acknowledging out in the open that we have issues with racism in our community, that we need to do a better job, and we need to work with find employers who are willing to hire people from the city, people of color, for these jobs. That's part of it, but it's a lot more than that. We need to do a better job of not just creating training programs and then having people go through those programs and then fall off and not find a job. We've got to create a better connections between the workforce agencies that are working with people to the training, and then having employers who are committed to hiring people from those training programs so that there's seamless connections across the gambit. So that's one area. And then I think probably this might be a little bit more controversial, but sometimes with our workforce programs, we try really hard to find the hardest to employ people first and then get them into the workforce programs. And for a lot of reasons, that doesn't always work. I mean, you have a lot of barriers that the workers are trying to get through. You have employers who are skeptical of people with bad employment histories. So I think with this next go around, we've got to find workers who at least have some history of work. And it could be the case that they're currently employed, but they're just really underemployed. And so we can find ways to say, look, you've got a work history here, you're putting in the work. We want to get you on a path to higher wage jobs, which requires getting connected to the training providers and again, connecting all the dots between these things. So it will not be easy by any means, but we have to keep trying because the need in our community is there, and the need for our employers is there as well.
Great. So we need workforce development in all areas of construction. Can you please be specific on how you are focused on increasing electricians?
Right. I think there's opportunities to grow the workforce in all areas of construction. So let's be clear about that. I mean, everything from plumbers doing lead laterals to traditional construction work. We're going to have workers needs in building our net zero energy buildings, workers for the factory to build those houses. But in my remarks to the task force and at the town hall event, I kind of zeroed in on electricians because I think green jobs means many different things, but I specifically mentioned electricians because there's such a clear connection to so many other areas of the plan. be it solar installation, LED lights, and energy efficient. When you think about energy efficiency in homes, much of that has to do with installing electrical appliances. There's a lot of talk about electrifying how we heat our homes and buildings. So that's going to require electricians and electric vehicle charging. So much of what is in the other chapters in the plans deals with electricity, that zeroing in and having a focus on electricians, I think, makes a lot of sense. That being said, there's a number of pathways for people to get involved, whether it's MATC, or we have we have unions that have training operations as well. And so, we'd like to see a mix of opportunities for people to get pathways into those electrical trades. And I think the last thing I'll say about that is those are really good paying jobs, electricians. And this is an opportunity for us to grow the pie. So when you think about diversifying a workforce, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like if more people of color are employed, that means there's going to be less, that we're pushing out the existing workers. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about growing the pie and really increasing the total net number of jobs for electricians and all the trades as we rebuild our city and rebuild our country.
That's great. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity for job growth with this plan. So thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Let's move on to the questions about transportation and the people-centered transportation and urban design proposal. The first question, what can the city do to limit investments in expanding the I-94 interchange and encourage investment in public transit instead?
So one of the things that's been the biggest challenge, I think, with putting the climate plan together, but also just government in general, is I sometimes describe we all know about the 3 branches of government, but there's at least 3 levels of government, state, federal, and local. So we are local government, and we have to understand what we control versus what we can just advocate for to other levels of government. And the interstate highway system is a function of the federal, it's part of a federal system that's administered through the states. And during the task force voted to be in opposition to the expansion of I-94, or to the extent that it would be expanded to have kind of supplementary consideration for things like rethinking 175 that intersects with it and bringing that to grade level, or making that a more people-centered street design. So we have advocated through the task force for changes to how I-94 is designed. I think people just need to speak out to the State Department of Transportation and to their elected officials with what they want to see with that expansion. So I think there are proposals that increase the number of lanes, but don't dramatically change the footprint. So there's a number of different ways to do this, but I think we could probably put a link in the chat to the state website where people can have some say on how this goes.
That's great. I've seen a lot of conversation about it, so I think folks will be interested. Our next question, I love how creative it is. So can smaller buses and electric vans be used like Uber? Right now, large buses drive around for hours empty.
So I think there's probably, part of the theory of public transit is to have defined routes. So I don't know if public transit is going to get to an Uber situation for its core operations. I do think it's an interesting concept and something that we need to ask Milwaukee County Transit about. Do they have smaller buses for less used routes? So I think that is something that really should be explored. There also are, I think, paratransit, which is a subset of transit. It does provide a little bit more customized service for people that have accessibility issues. So there's something to the question, but I don't see public transit going the way of Uber, where it's all just driven by individuals' requests. I think the efficiency of established routes is going to be something that will likely remain.
Great.
Thanks for that, Eric. So this is a good segue into my next question here, which is we're talking about electric cars and vans. Electric cars and vans are a great concept, but what about the part of getting battery materials and then disposing of them? That part of the process contributes to toxic waste.
Yeah, I think it's something that we have to be concerned about. There's a lot in this plan where we are counting on technological improvements. So normally when not a lot of people are doing something, that's hard to develop a market for reuse and recycling. As these things expand, we're counting on people looking at developing solutions for that. So having done a little bit of research on this, one thing you can do is think about kind of downscaling. Once a battery starts to degrade to the point where it can't, be used reliably for long-term transit, a lot of times the battery life won't just go from 100 to 0. It'll slowly degrade. Maybe you get 80%. Right. And so people are starting to look at, can you reuse a battery for stationary purposes? So maybe connected to a house. Once it comes out of the car, and then maybe later on in its life, it's used to do battery storage in a house, and then eventually it goes away. But I think it's an important question, and we'll need more research, and perhaps there's some standards that can be applied to manufacturers of batteries to require them to be constructed such that it's easier to recycle them on the back end. And this is a real problem, not just with electric cars, but really across everything that we use in our consumer society. I think there's a concept called producer responsibility, where people that make products should think about their end of life and how they get, recycled. And, that's an area where there could, through state or federal law, you could see, an opportunity for rules about that kind of thing. But unfortunately, with the variety of products that are out there right now, there aren't strong producer responsibility laws currently. But it certainly is a concern, but but I also don't think it's a reason not to move forward with our electrification plans.
And certainly the one fun thing about technology and this technology is that it's very new. So it's constantly evolving, and hopefully that evolution will catch up where we can reuse those batteries. So thank you, Eric, for that. Our last set of questions is about waste and relates to the food waste reduction proposal. The first question comes from someone who works for a nonprofit that helps businesses and institutions get to zero waste. They'd like to know more about the effort to reduce food waste. Does this element of the plan still have room for development?
Yes, it does. That's the short answer to the question. This is an area where I think it's an emerging area of climate planning across cities. We've seen toolkits from National Resources Defense Council and things like that will, be consulting. But this is certainly an area where not only government, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation in the private sector as well to find ways to reduce waste in our food streams. So one of the things that came out, there's a proposal from UW Extension to Milwaukee County's ARPA task force, where Milwaukee County or UW Extension might take the lead on this topic, but it is certainly emerging. We do not claim to have all the answers in this regard. The other thing I should mention is, as we were getting feedback, on the plan so far, this might be a chapter where we might broaden the title. We're debating on whether we leave it at food waste or whether we broaden the title to be more broadly about sustainable consumption, because it really is a concern. And I think people's experience dealing with solid waste and consumer waste is something that it's a little easier for people to see, more so than energy policy. And so we're trying to think about, do we expand that chapter scope to include more than just food waste, but to reduce other forms of wastes that contribute to carbon emissions.
Great. That ties very well into our last question. And this also includes, this last question includes an encouraging comment and then their question. So the comment is, thank you for your work and attention to climate change and environmental justice. You all make me proud of our city. Then the question, what are your plans or thoughts for prohibiting single-use plastics? Plastic pollution is tremendous. Only 5% of what is sent to facilities is recycled. The rest ends up in our environment and waterways.
Sure. So before I answer the question about waste, I want to share my appreciation to everybody on the task force. So many working group members contributed to this plan. And I think it's a better plan for the participation that we've had in the public. So we really appreciate everyone being involved in this. As for single-use plastics, I think it was about 2015, the state of Wisconsin passed a law, which was called the quote ban on bans. And that means they prohibited cities from banning plastic bags or any kind of single-use containers. So we are not allowed under state law to ban plastic, put fees on it, or otherwise regulate it. However, we still acknowledge it's a problem. And so working with the coalition called Plastic Free Milwaukee, we developed a lake-friendly pledge for businesses to really think about how much plastic they're putting out into the environment. And so there's a pledge which calls for businesses to have, options for composting and recycling. And then we're also working on we would like to see a model of the private sector where there's plastic reuse systems. So at large concerts, for example, instead of just handing out plastic cups, you have a system where people can get a plastic cup, but then they put it back in bins and it gets washed and reused. And we think there's an opportunity for that because it's been discouraging, I think, during the pandemic. Takeout and containers have proliferated. So we're really going in the wrong direction since COVID-19 on plastic waste. And we get it, we get why that is, but we've been trying to do education and outreach to restaurants to say, you can still wash things. It's still perfectly within the health code to if you go to a coffee shop, for example, to get a mug and they can wash it and sanitize it just like they always have. And that protects against COVID as well, or better than, having disposables. So we've really got to keep pushing on cutting plastic waste through the strategies that are available to us and haven't been banned by the state.
Yeah, I've heard some really exciting things from that program. And there's also the Lake-Friendly Neighborhood program. Is that new as well?
So we have an Eco Neighborhoods program, and staff works with groups like Sherman Park, and we will do education and outreach. And we want to connect neighborhoods to all the existing programs, be it Lake Friendly or different nonprofits have different programs. We want neighborhood groups, rather than having to reinvent the wheel all the time on sustainability, to know. And we have a network of the city and all of our nonprofit partners to help people use the programs that have been developed. And so, yeah, we want to tell neighbors about Lake Friendly, the Lake Friendly Pledge, and get them to adopt it as well. But we could talk a long time about plastic waste, but if you think about the whole course of human history, this notion that we got to have a plastic spoon or a plastic bag that gets used once and thrown away is really, it's not good. And it's a relatively new phenomenon in the last 50 years or so. And we've got to find a way to reverse that trend for the sake of our planet.
Great. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Eric. Well, this wraps up the questions we received during the town hall. We appreciate you taking the time to answer all of these questions for the community, Eric. And thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. One last reminder that the plan is open for public comment until November 30th. Please visit the website to complete the survey. You can also share your more detailed suggestions for specific proposals on the website as well. Take care.
Bye now.